Hello and welcome to Finextra. I'm Emily Horler and I'm here with Marios Kyriacou of the Security Bureau, Parth Desai of Pelican and Tony Wicks from Swift. And we're talking about payments fraud. Thank you everyone for joining me.
Thank you.
So Tony, we've seen several high-profile frauds impacting banks recently. What are the key vulnerabilities Swift is addressing and how is Swift helping banks tackle this challenge?
So Swift launched the Customer Security Program in May last year, so May 2016. And that's an externally focused program of activity that's designed to bolster the cybersecurity and payment fraud prevention controls within the Swift community and for all Swift connected customers. That Swift Customer Security Program really was launched on the back of and as a result of the cyber incidents and the increased level of threat that we've seen across the industry. The events themselves, I think, was significant in as much as what we were seeing is that institutions themselves were being targeted by the attackers. So that's where those cyber attackers actually gained access to back office environments, compromised those environments, and ultimately were then able to send fraudulent payment instructions from the back office infrastructure. In response to that, the Customer Security Program is really doing three things. The first is really about the good hygiene associated with those environments. So at the request of our community, we've introduced what is a Swift Customer Security Controls Framework, which defines a minimum standard associated with the type of controls that people must have within their environment. And that's something that all customers will need to attest to in terms of their progress against those controls by the end of this year. Secondly, we've bolstered the way that we are sharing information across the community. So we have a forensics team that looks at all of the issues and problems that are reported to us, and that information is then reshared back to the community in order to ensure that people are forewarned and forearmed in terms of the challenges. And then finally, we are introducing services associated with payment protection and for fraud prevention that customers can subscribe to.
So Parth, how does Pelican perceive the fraud threats facing banks at the moment? And are there any specific lessons you feel the payments industry can learn from with the recent attacks?
Yes, there are many lessons that we can learn as an industry. However, the most important one is that these threats are going to continue and they will increase as time goes on. What the industry has been doing is that they've been putting up barriers against the fraudsters. However, the fraudsters are well financed, they have latest technologies, and they are very well organized. They look at high value payment networks as good ROI, very lucrative business, and they get good ROI on that. So I think these things will continue. What we really need is real-time forensics. Let me explain. In forensics, police looks at lots of small pieces of information to put together a case and solve that based on the information available after the crime has happened. What we need is to look at all the information that is available and try to identify an abnormal issue while the fraud is happening. And that is what will help us solve the problem. So I believe that now the technology is available to solve the real-time forensic issue.
So Marios, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners estimate that 78% of overall fraud losses stem from actions committed internally by employees. So what can organisations do to guard against the insider vulnerability?
Organisations often focus on external attackers, those hackers that we never see. However, as they've pointed out, insiders do exist and they will continue to exploit vulnerabilities internally. There are quite a few number of things that can be done by organisations, and it's actually to do with the life cycle of an employee entering your organisation to them exiting the organisation. Such as when they enter the organisation, are they vetted correctly and credit checked correctly? Are they open to fraud or bribery or anything like that? Are the right procedures and processes in place to track their activity, such as audit trails and logging facilities? As they move around the organisations as employees, switch roles, so they may not have the same role as they did when they entered to as they left. Are there right procedures in place to track these role changes, such as revoking access to some systems and granting access to others? Is there an audit trail to make sure that's actually adequately tracked and that they have adequate access control? In terms of the actual roles that they have, I think that risks have to be evaluated. If there's a segregation of duty that could be introduced for people's roles, is there a conflict of interest within the same role, for example, and how do they eliminate that? So there are a number of things that can be done. Apart from the usual, what we call cyber hygiene, patching systems, etc. In terms of exiting the organisation, revoking access is the probably one of the most important things that can be done. And how do you do that? How do you know which employees have access to which systems? So back to auditing, back to understanding the roles of an employee is important.
So back to you, Tony. What we've heard is that the fraud challenge is clearly not a static one. So how do you see this technology arms race against fraudsters progressing, and what further steps can the payments community take to safeguard global finances?
So I think it's a very good question. As a sort of technologist and a technology background, I think we've seen a resurgence in recent years on big data, AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning types of techniques. And I think they show incredible levels of promise associated with this area. But I think in reality, it's one of those areas where technology itself is not going to win the day. Technology will keep us up with the fraudsters, but to get ahead of them needs to take a different view and a different angle. And I think that will come from collaboration across the industry. I think it's important that people share the information associated with the incidents and that we're open as an industry in terms of sharing that information and communicating it back. And I think it's important that we provide an industry-based response. SWIFT, as you know, is a network connector of many and multiple institutions. In terms of that, nobody wants to be the weakest link in the chain. And I think as a community and as a collaborative community, that's the way that we get ahead of the fraudsters.
And Marios, so how do you see the role of these technologies such as biometrics developing in the face of cybercrime?
Well, technology is moving pretty quickly, but we've still got that age-old problem of passwords for authentication, and we're still dealing with the problems of authorization and, again, as I mentioned earlier, revoking access and granting access, and these things really do stem from processes and adequate processes and not just technology. In terms of biometrics specifically, we've seen Apple use their Apple Pay and the biometrics within their iPhones, and it appears so far that they've implemented that pretty well. But with any technology, it's all about implementation and secure implementation and making sure that security is designed into the product and designed into biometrics. So it will play a part, definitely. It's just how well implemented this technology is.
And Parth, so moving on from biometrics to artificial intelligence, how do you think this could be implemented to enhance payment security?
Yes, artificial intelligence is one of the promising technologies which can address this fraud problem. What artificial intelligence and machine learning allows us to do is look at the whole transaction in perspective and the environment of where it is being carried out. It can look at the whole payment and look at it individually as well as on a comprehensive basis to see if there's anything unusual about it. As I mentioned earlier, real-time forensics, that is possible through artificial intelligence. What artificial intelligence and machine learning does, it looks at lots of small pieces of information and looks at something that is unusual about the transaction. Normally the transaction could be on the face of it look normal and straightforward, but if you look at it in detail, like for example the time the transaction was executed, or the frequency of transaction, or sudden change in the frequency of transaction, these things can signal a potential threat or a fraud in the whole process. Secondly, as we are looking at it at the industry, it's a cat and mouse game. The industry puts on some barriers and the fraudsters find a way to overcome them. So machine learning allows us to constantly change and adopt itself as the transaction flows go on. When we put on some sanctions, we put on the barriers, the fraudsters come up with the new solutions around that. The machine learning detects that and signals the changes and then allows us to adopt the solution, as well as it itself will adopt the solution to make sure that it keeps on detecting the frauds in the new environment. Also, it is important to look at the false positive side. So it will also adopt to learn areas which are not really frauds, and it can actually increase the accuracy, at the same time reduce the false positive.
Parth, Tony, Marios, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.